The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as tourists began gathering for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd, a tall figure in civilian clothes stood quietly near the barrier, his weathered hands resting on the metal rail. Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson had traveled thousands of miles from his base in North Carolina to witness this ancient tradition, but his reasons went far deeper than simple tourism. Michael had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a United States Marine. His broad shoulders carried the invisible weight of memories that haunted his sleep, and his steel blue eyes held stories that few would ever understand. At 32 years old, he had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes. The doctors at the VA hospital had suggested this trip to England as part of his recovery process. They called it therapeutic travel, but Michael simply called it necessary. The crowd around him buzzed with excitement as cameras clicked and children pointed at the approaching guards. Families from around the world had gathered to witness this centuries-old spectacle, their faces bright with anticipation. Tour guides spoke in multiple languages, explaining the significance of the ceremony to eager listeners. The atmosphere was festive, almost carnival-like, but Michael remained focused on something else entirely. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had encouraged him to connect with positive military traditions from other cultures. She believed it might help him find peace with his own service. Michael wasn't entirely convinced, but he respected her opinion enough to make the journey. The flight from Charlotte to London had been long and uncomfortable, filled with memories he tried to suppress. Every time the plane hit turbulence, his mind flashed back to helicopter rides over hostile territory. Standing in the crowd now, Michael felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. The sounds of marching boots on stone reminded him of patrol formations in Helmand Province. The disciplined movements of the approaching guards triggered muscle memory from his own training. He had hoped this experience would be different, more peaceful, but his body betrayed him with its automatic responses to military stimuli. The tourists around him seemed oblivious to his internal struggle. A Japanese family took selfies nearby while their youngest child waved a small British flag. An elderly German couple studied their guidebook intently, pointing at pictures of the guards' distinctive red tunics and bearskin hats. Teenage backpackers from Australia laughed as they tried to mimic the guards' rigid posture. The scene was light-hearted and joyful, yet Michael felt isolated within the crowd. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister Lisa, back in Wilmington. "Hope you're having fun. Send pictures." The simple request made him realize he hadn't taken a single photograph since arriving in London 2 days ago. He had walked through Westminster Abbey, crossed Tower Bridge, and visited the Churchill War Rooms, but nothing had moved him to capture the moment. Everything felt distant, viewed through a fog of medication and emotional numbness. The sound of approaching drums grew louder, and the crowd pressed closer to the barriers. Michael found himself pushed forward by the surge of people, his personal space invaded by eager tourists. A middle-aged woman from Ohio bumped into his elbow while adjusting her camera settings. "Excuse me, honey," she said cheerfully, apparently unaware of his discomfort. "This is so exciting. I've been planning this trip for 2 years. Michael nodded politely but said nothing. Small talk had become increasingly difficult since his return from deployment. The gap between civilian concerns and his own reality seemed unbridgeable. How could he explain that the sight of uniformed guards triggered memories of friends who would never return home? How could he describe the weight of survivor's guilt that pressed down on his chest every morning when he woke up? The first notes of military music drifted across the courtyard as the old guard began their march toward the ceremony location. Michael's military training automatically analyzed their formation, their timing, their precision. These British soldiers moved with the same disciplined grace he had once possessed, before improvised explosive devices and sniper fire had changed everything. Their confidence was unmistakable, their pride evident in every step. As the guards drew closer, Michael could see their faces beneath the iconic bearskin hats. These were professional soldiers, not ceremonial actors. Their eyes remained fixed straight ahead, their expressions serious and focused. The crowd's chatter died down as the spectacle began in earnest. Children stopped fidgeting, and adults lowered their voices to whispers. The ancient ceremony commanded respect from even the most casual observers. Michael studied each guard as they passed, wondering about their backgrounds. Had any of them served in combat zones? Did they carry their own invisible wounds? Military service created bonds that transcended nationality, and he found himself feeling a kinship with these British soldiers despite having never met them. They understood the weight of duty, the sacrifice of service, and the burden of representing something larger than themselves. The precision of their movements was mesmerizing. Each step was calculated, each turn executed with mechanical perfection. Michael remembered his own drill instructor's voice echoing through the humid air at Paris Island. Discipline in ceremony translates to discipline in combat. These guards embodied that principle, their parade ground excellence suggesting deeper military competence. A small child near Michael started crying, overwhelmed by the crowd and the unfamiliar sounds. His mother tried to comfort him while maintaining her position at the barrier. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered. "They're just soldiers playing dress-up." The innocent comment stung Michael more than it should have. These weren't actors or tourist attractions. They were warriors maintaining a tradition that stretched back centuries. The guards continued their approach, their red tunics brilliant in the morning sunlight. Each uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection. Michael appreciated the attention to detail, remembering his own obsession with military standards during his active service. Everything had to be perfect, because lives depended on that level of precision. A loose thread could mean death in combat, and that mindset never completely disappeared. His breathing became shallow as the guards drew nearer. The familiar panic was building in his chest, the same feeling that had sent him to the emergency room 3 times in the past 6 months. Dr. Martinez had taught him breathing exercises for moments like this, but they felt inadequate against the rising tide of anxiety. The crowd's excitement only amplified his distress, their joy contrasting sharply with his internal turmoil. Michael closed his eyes and tried to center himself, focusing on the techniques he had learned in therapy. Count to 10. Breathe deeply. Identify your surroundings. You are safe. You are in England. You are not in Afghanistan. The mantras helped slightly, but the sounds and smells of the military ceremony continued to trigger unwanted memories. When he opened his eyes again, the guards were much closer. He could see their individual faces now, each one a study in military bearing and professional composure. One guard in particular caught his attention, a tall soldier with dark hair visible beneath his bearskin hat. Something about his posture, his focus, seemed familiar. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen this man before, though he knew that was impossible. The guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, following military protocol perfectly. His jaw was set with determination, his shoulders square with pride. Michael recognized the look. It was the same expression he had worn during countless ceremonies and parades. The guard embodied everything Michael had once been: confident, focused, unbroken. As the formation passed directly in front of him, Michael felt a strange mixture of admiration and envy. These soldiers still possessed what he had lost, the ability to serve with honor and dignity. They hadn't been shattered by combat trauma or broken by survivors' guilt. Their uniforms still represented hope rather than haunting memories. The crowd began to follow the guards toward the ceremony location, but Michael remained at the barrier. His legs felt weak, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the metal rail. The encounter had affected him more than expected, stirring emotions he thought he had buried. Part of him wanted to follow the procession, to witness the complete ceremony, but another part needed to process what he had just experienced. A gentle breeze carried the fading sound of military music across the courtyard. The morning was growing warmer, and the castle grounds were filling with more tourists arriving for later ceremonies. Michael realized he was sweating despite the cool air, his body's stress response activated by proximity to military activity. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Martinez's number. She had told him to call if he needed to talk during his trip, regardless of the time difference. Her voicemail greeting was professional, but warm. "You've reached Dr. Sarah Martinez. Please leave a detailed message and I'll return your call as soon as possible." After the beep, Michael struggled to find words. "Dr. Martinez, it's Michael. I'm at Windsor Castle, and I saw the guards marching, and it brought back a lot of memories. I'm okay, I think, but I wanted you to know. I'll try calling again later." He ended the call feeling slightly foolish, but also relieved to have made contact with his support system. The courtyard was emptying as tourists followed the ceremony to its completion. Michael stood alone now, the silence almost oppressive after the earlier excitement. He looked around at the ancient stones, the historical significance of his surroundings finally registering. This castle had witnessed centuries of military traditions, countless young men marching through these same gates toward unknown destinies. His grandfather had fought in World War II, serving in the Pacific Theater with distinction. Michael had grown up hearing stories of honor, duty, and heroism. Those tales had inspired his own military service, filling him with dreams of following in his grandfather's footsteps. The reality of modern warfare had been far different from those nostalgic stories, but the core values remained the same. A maintenance worker began cleaning up the area, collecting discarded programs and empty water bottles left by the crowd. He nodded pleasantly at Michael, apparently accustomed to tourists lingering after ceremonies. "First time seeing the guards?" he asked in a friendly Cockney accent. "Yes," Michael replied, his voice hoarse from the morning's emotional strain. "It was impressive. Been working here 12 years, the man continued while picking up litter. Never gets old, watching people's reactions. Some cry, some cheer, some just stand there stunned. Each person sees something different in the ceremony." Michael appreciated the man's casual wisdom. "What do you see?" he asked. The worker paused in his cleaning and looked thoughtful. "Continuity, I suppose. These traditions connect us to our history, to the men who came before. Makes you feel part of something bigger than yourself, doesn't it?" The simple observation struck Michael deeply. He had been so focused on his own trauma, his own losses, that he had forgotten the larger purpose of military service. These British guards weren't performing for tourists. They were honoring their predecessors and maintaining traditions that transcended individual experience. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. "That helps put things in perspective." The maintenance worker smiled and continued his work. "Enjoy the rest of your visit, mate. The castle's got plenty more to show you." As Michael walked away from the ceremony area, he felt a subtle shift in his emotional state. The encounter with the guards had been overwhelming, but it had also reminded him of who he used to be. Perhaps Dr. Martinez had been right about therapeutic travel. Sometimes you had to face your triggers to overcome them. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stones of Windsor Castle and promising a beautiful day ahead. Michael pulled out his phone and, for the first time since arriving in London, took a photograph. The image captured the empty courtyard where he had just witnessed something profound. Not just a military ceremony, but a moment of personal recognition and possible healing. Lance Corporal James Harrison adjusted his bearskin hat one final time before stepping into formation with the other guards. At 28 years old, he had served with the Grenadier Guards for 6 years, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan, where he had earned recognition for exceptional courage under fire. Today's ceremony at Windsor Castle should have been routine, but something felt different. An unexplainable tension hung in the air, like the calm before a storm that every soldier learns to recognize. James had been selected for ceremonial duties based on his exemplary service record and his ability to maintain perfect composure under pressure. The tourists saw only the pageantry and tradition, but James knew that every guard in the formation was a battle-tested warrior. They were not actors in costume. They were professional soldiers who had earned their red tunics through blood, sweat, and sacrifice in some of the world's most dangerous places. The morning briefing had been standard protocol. Maintain formation, keep eyes forward, ignore distractions from the crowd, execute every movement with precision. Sergeant Major Williams had emphasized the importance of representing British military excellence to the international audience that gathered daily at the castle. "You are not just guards today," he had said. "You are ambassadors for every soldier who has ever worn this uniform." As James marched with his unit toward the ceremony grounds, muscle memory took control of his movements. Each step was measured, each turn executed with mechanical precision. His mind, however, wandered to a letter he had received the previous week from his former battle buddy, Corporal Davies, who was recovering from injuries sustained in their last deployment together. The letter had been upbeat, full of jokes and memories from their time overseas, but James could read between the lines. Davies was struggling with more than physical wounds. The weight of his rifle felt familiar in James's hands as he maintained the ceremonial carry position. This same weapon had saved his life multiple times in the mountains of Afghanistan, though today it served only symbolic purposes. The transition from combat zone to ceremonial duty had been challenging for many guards. Some thrived on the precision and pageantry, while others missed the adrenaline and clear purpose of active combat operations. The crowd came into view as the formation rounded the corner of the castle's ancient walls. Hundreds of tourists pressed against the barriers, cameras raised, voices excited with anticipation. James had performed this ceremony countless times, but he never stopped being amazed by the international audience it attracted. People traveled from around the world to witness this display of British military tradition. His trained eyes automatically scanned the crowd for potential threats, a habit ingrained through years of combat deployments. Most faces showed nothing but innocent curiosity and excitement. Children pointed and waved while their parents snapped photographs. Elderly couples studied guidebooks and whispered observations to each other. The scene was peaceful and joyful, exactly what ceremonies like this were meant to inspire. But then James noticed something unusual. Near the front barrier, a man stood completely still while the crowd around him moved and chattered. He was tall and broad-shouldered, clearly American based on his clothing and posture. But it wasn't his nationality that caught James's attention. It was the way he stood. The man's bearing was unmistakably military, despite his civilian clothes. His hands gripped the barrier with white knuckles, and his jaw was clenched with visible tension. As the formation drew closer, James could see more details of the mysterious observer. The man's eyes held a haunted quality that James recognized immediately. He had seen the same look in mirrors after particularly difficult deployments, the same expression worn by soldiers who had seen too much and survived when others hadn't. This was a warrior watching warriors, and something about the encounter felt profoundly significant. James fought to maintain his forward gaze as protocol demanded, but he found himself drawn to the tense figure at the barrier. The man's hands trembled slightly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. James recognized the signs of combat stress, having witnessed it in fellow soldiers and experienced it himself during the difficult transition back to civilian-like duties after deployment. The drums beat steadily as the formation maintained its pace, but James felt time slowing down as they approached the section of barrier where the mysterious man stood. His peripheral vision caught more details. The man's weathered hands spoke of hard work and harder experiences. His posture suggested someone fighting an internal battle, and his eyes held stories that James somehow understood without hearing them. Something inexplicable began happening in James's chest, a tightening sensation that had nothing to do with the physical demands of the ceremony. He felt a connection forming with this stranger, a recognition that transcended nationality and circumstance. Both men were soldiers. Both had served in the same war zone. Both carried invisible scars from their service. The ceremonial distance between them seemed artificial and unnecessary. The crowd's excitement reached a crescendo as the guards approached their position. Cameras clicked rapidly, children called out greetings, and tour guides provided running commentary in multiple languages. But James found himself tuning out the noise, focusing instead on the quiet drama unfolding at the barrier. The American's breathing had become visibly labored, and his grip on the metal rail had tightened to the point where his knuckles showed white through tanned skin. James had witnessed panic attacks in fellow soldiers, understanding the invisible battle being fought just meters away. Part of him wanted to break formation, to offer support to a brother in arms who was clearly struggling. But duty demanded that he maintain protocol, that he continue the ancient ceremony regardless of personal concerns. The conflict between human compassion and military discipline created its own tension in his chest. As they drew within 20 meters of the barrier, James made a decision that would later be discussed in military circles for months to come. He began to subtly adjust his position within the formation, making minor corrections that would bring him directly in line with the struggling American. His fellow guards, trained to maintain formation integrity, unconsciously adjusted their own positions to accommodate his movement. The American seemed to sense the approaching presence of the guards with an almost supernatural awareness. His body went rigid. His breathing became even more labored, and his eyes squeezed shut, as if trying to block out triggering stimuli. James recognized the defensive posture of someone experiencing combat flashbacks, transported mentally from the peaceful castle grounds to some distant battlefield where death had been a constant companion. Sergeant Major Williams had drilled into every guard the absolute importance of maintaining eye discipline during ceremonies. Eyes forward, no acknowledgement of the crowd, complete focus on military bearing and precision. Breaking this protocol was a serious breach that could result in disciplinary action and removal from ceremonial duties. Yet James felt compelled by something deeper than regulations, something that connected soldier to soldier across all artificial boundaries. 15 meters from the barrier now, and James could see that the American was fighting a losing battle against his demons. The man's whole body shook with barely controlled tremors, and his face had gone pale despite his obvious tan. Sweat ran down his temples, and his lips moved silently in what looked like prayers or mantras. The tourists around him remained oblivious to his distress, focused entirely on the approaching pageantry. 10 meters away, and James made another crucial decision. As his section of the formation approached the precise point where the American stood, he began to prepare for something that violated every rule of ceremonial conduct. His heart rate increased, not from physical exertion, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Years of military discipline warred with human instinct and brotherhood that transcended national boundaries. 5 meters from the barrier, and the American's eyes suddenly snapped open. The look of panic and desperation in them hit James like a physical blow. Here was a fellow warrior, drowning in his own memories, surrounded by celebrating civilians who couldn't understand his pain. In that moment, James saw not an American tourist, but a brother in arms who needed acknowledgement, who needed to know that his sacrifice and suffering were recognized by someone who understood. The critical moment arrived as James's position in the formation brought him directly parallel to the barrier where the American stood. Protocol demanded that he maintain his forward gaze, execute a perfect ceremonial march past the crowd, and continue without any acknowledgement of the spectators. But something deeper than training took control of James's actions. As he reached the exact point where the American gripped the barrier, James made eye contact. It lasted only a split second, but in that brief moment, worlds collided. Two soldiers from different nations, different wars, different circumstances, connected across the artificial divide of ceremony and civilian expectations. James's eyes conveyed recognition, respect, and understanding. The American's eyes reflected surprise, relief, and a desperate gratitude for being seen as more than just another face in the crowd. The moment stretched beyond its actual duration, taking on the quality of dreams or nightmares where time bends and significant events unfold in slow motion. James saw combat memories flash through the American's eyes. Desert landscapes, fallen comrades, moments of terror and heroism that civilian words could never adequately describe. In return, he felt his own memories surface. The weight of duty, the cost of survival, the brotherhood forged in fire that connected all warriors regardless of flag or uniform. The crowd, initially oblivious to the silent drama unfolding before them, began to sense that something unusual was happening. The ceremonial precision of the guards was so well known that any deviation from protocol immediately attracted attention. Several tourists lowered their cameras, sensing the gravity of the moment without understanding its significance. Children stopped pointing and waving, influenced by the adult tension around them. A Japanese businessman noticed first, tugging on his wife's sleeve and pointing at the guard who had broken the sacred rule of eye contact. An elderly British couple exchanged worried glances, uncertain whether they were witnessing a breach of protocol or something more meaningful. The Australian backpackers stopped their casual chatter, sensing the emotional weight that had suddenly filled the air around the barrier. James felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him as more spectators noticed the deviation from expected ceremony. His peripheral vision caught sight of tourists lowering cameras and leaning forward, trying to understand what was happening. The moment was becoming public, witnessed by dozens of people who would later struggle to explain what they had seen. The American at the barrier seemed frozen in place, his entire body rigid with emotion. Tears began to form in his eyes, not from shame or embarrassment, but from the overwhelming relief of being recognized and understood by a fellow warrior. The simple act of acknowledgement had broken through his isolation, reminding him that he was not alone in carrying the invisible burdens of military service. Time seemed suspended as the two soldiers maintained their connection, despite the artificial barriers of ceremony and protocol. James knew he was violating every rule of engagement for ceremonial duties, but he also knew that some things transcended regulations. The moment demanded human recognition over military precision, brotherhood over bureaucracy. The other guards in the formation began to notice the disruption, their own discipline wavering as they witnessed their colleagues' unprecedented break from protocol. Some maintained their forward gaze through sheer force of training, while others risked subtle glances toward the unfolding drama. The formation itself began to show microscopic signs of uncertainty as individual guards processed the unusual situation. Sergeant Major Williams, positioned to observe the entire ceremony, immediately spotted the breach in protocol. His experienced eyes took in the situation, the guard making unauthorized eye contact, the emotional civilian at the barrier, the crowd's growing awareness that something significant was happening. His military mind began calculating consequences and responses, but something in the scene gave him pause. The moment stretched on, laden with meaning that transcended its brief duration. James felt the full weight of his decision, the potential consequences to his career, the violation of centuries-old protocol, the public nature of his choice. But looking into the American's eyes, he also felt the rightness of his action. This was what military service was truly about, not ceremony or pageantry, but the bonds between warriors and the recognition of shared sacrifice. The American's grip on the barrier finally relaxed slightly, and a barely perceptible nod passed between the two men. It was acknowledgement and gratitude, understanding and respect, compressed into the smallest possible gesture. The moment had achieved its purpose. Two warriors had recognized each other across artificial boundaries, and neither would be quite the same afterward. As James prepared to continue with the ceremony, he knew that this moment would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Military historians would debate the propriety of his actions, while fellow soldiers would understand the deeper meaning of what had occurred. The brief eye contact had bridged continents and conflicts, reminding everyone present that beneath uniforms and ceremonies were human beings who had sacrificed much in service of ideals larger than themselves. The silence that followed the eye contact between James and Michael was deafening. What had begun as a routine ceremonial procession suddenly transformed into something far more profound and controversial. The crowd, initially focused on capturing the perfect photograph or video of the famous guards, found themselves witnessing an unprecedented breach of centuries-old military protocol. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, a retired teacher from Birmingham who had attended the ceremony annually for 15 years, was the first to vocalize what everyone was thinking. Did that guard did he look at someone? Her voice carried a mixture of confusion and disbelief that rippled through the nearby spectators. She had never seen anything like it in all her years of watching the ceremonies. The Japanese businessman, Hiroshi Tanaka, continued recording on his phone but leaned toward his wife with wide eyes. "Something is happening," he whispered in rapid Japanese. "This is not normal." His wife, equally perplexed, zoomed in on both the guard and the American man at the barrier, sensing that they were documenting something historically significant. James felt the weight of hundreds of stares as he forced himself to continue the ceremonial march. His military training screamed at him to maintain forward focus, to pretend the moment had never happened. But the damage was already done. The crowd's energy had shifted from casual tourism to intense scrutiny. Every camera was now trained on him, every conversation focused on what they had just witnessed. Michael, still gripping the barrier with trembling hands, felt exposed and vulnerable under the sudden attention. The guard's acknowledgement had provided a moment of profound relief, but now the crowd's focus made him feel like an exhibit in a zoo. His breathing remained shallow and rapid, but for different reasons now. The panic attack was subsiding, replaced by embarrassment and confusion about what had just occurred. A group of American college students nearby began debating among themselves about the significance of what they had witnessed. "That was definitely not supposed to happen," said Jake Morrison, a history major from Boston University. "These guards are famous for never breaking character." His girlfriend, Sarah Chen, continued filming while nodding in agreement. "My dad was in the army," she added. "He always said military ceremonies are sacred. You don't just break protocol like that." The ripple effect of confusion and excitement continued to spread through the crowd. Parents tried to explain to their children what had happened, though they didn't fully understand it themselves. "The soldier looked at the man, sweetie," one mother told her 6-year-old son. "That's not what they usually do." The child's innocent response carried surprising wisdom. "Maybe the man needed him to look." Sergeant Major Williams, observing from his position at the side of the formation, felt his jaw tighten with a mixture of anger and concern. Lance Corporal Harrison was one of his best soldiers, with an exemplary record and strong military bearing. This unprecedented breach of protocol was completely out of character and would require immediate investigation. But something about the scene gave him pause. The obvious distress of the civilian, the deliberate nature of Harrison's action, and the profound emotional weight that seemed to hang in the air. The other guards in the formation struggled to maintain their composure as they became aware of the situation. Private Collins, marching directly behind James, fought to keep his eyes forward despite his burning curiosity about what had caused such a stir in the crowd. Corporal Welsh, positioned to James's left, noticed the increased camera activity and crowd murmurs, but maintained his discipline through sheer force of training. The ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. What should have been a routine display of military precision had become a human drama playing out in front of an international audience. Tour guides struggled to maintain their usual commentary, unsure how to address what they had witnessed. Some tried to downplay the incident, while others acknowledged that they had just seen something unprecedented. An elderly German couple, Hans and Greta Müller, discussed the event in hushed tones. Hans, who had served in the Bundeswehr decades earlier, understood the gravity of what had occurred. "In all my years of military service," he told his wife, "I never saw a soldier break ceremony like that. There must have been a very good reason." Greta, equally moved by the obvious emotion of the moment, nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes human feelings are more important than rules. The social media age meant that videos and photographs of the incident were already being uploaded and shared across multiple platforms. Within minutes, the hashtag #OxGuardBreaksProtocol began trending on Twitter. The footage showed clearly the moment of eye contact, the emotional state of both men, and the crowd's shocked reaction. Comments ranged from criticism of the guard's lack of discipline to praise for his humanity and compassion. Michael finally released his death grip on the barrier and stepped back from the crowd, needing space to process what had just happened. The guard's simple act of recognition had broken through his isolation in a way that months of therapy had failed to achieve. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he felt seen and understood by someone who truly comprehended his experience. The Australian backpackers, Emma and Liam Davidson, followed Michael's retreat with their eyes. Emma, whose brother had served in the Australian Army, recognized the signs of combat stress. "That guy's a veteran," she told Liam quietly. "And he's struggling. No wonder the guard looked at him. Soldiers look out for each other." Her observation was overheard by several nearby tourists, adding another layer of understanding to the unfolding drama. James continued the ceremonial march, but his mind reeled with the implications of his actions. He had spent 6 years building a reputation for excellence and reliability. His service record was spotless, his dedication unquestionable. Now, in a moment of human compassion, he had potentially jeopardized everything he had worked to achieve. But looking back at the American's face, he knew he would make the same choice again. The crowd began to fragment as some tourists followed the continuing ceremony while others remained focused on the aftermath of the dramatic moment. Groups formed spontaneously to discuss what they had witnessed, with opinions varying wildly about whether the guard's actions were appropriate. The incident had transformed casual observers into passionate debaters about military protocol, human compassion, and the balance between duty and empathy. Mrs. Patricia Winters, a military spouse from Surrey whose husband had served multiple deployments, found herself defending the guard's actions to a group of critical tourists. "My husband has PTSD," she said firmly. "If someone in uniform acknowledged his pain like that, it could mean everything. Sometimes being human is more important than being perfect." Her passionate defense silenced the critics and added weight to the growing understanding of what had really occurred. The castle staff began to take notice of the unusual commotion surrounding the ceremony. Security personnel, trained to identify potential threats or disruptions, moved closer to assess the situation. However, they quickly realized that this was not a security issue, but rather an emotional event that had touched the hearts of many spectators. Their presence remained unobtrusive, allowing the natural resolution of the moment to unfold. Dr. James Whitmore, a military historian from Cambridge University, who happened to be in the crowd conducting research on ceremonial traditions, furiously scribbled notes in his notebook. He recognized that he was witnessing something that would likely be studied and analyzed for years to come. The intersection of personal trauma, military protocol, and human compassion created a perfect storm of historical significance. Michael's phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Martinez, his therapist back in North Carolina. The time difference meant she was calling early, probably in response to his voicemail from earlier. He declined the call, not ready to articulate what had just happened. The experience was too fresh, too emotionally complex to summarize in a brief conversation. He needed time to process the profound impact of the guard's simple acknowledgement. The ceremony continued toward its conclusion, but the energy remained charged with the aftermath of the unexpected human moment. James executed each subsequent movement with mechanical precision, but his thoughts remained with the American veteran at the barrier. He wondered about the man's story, his struggles, his journey to this moment at Windsor Castle. The brief eye contact had created a connection that transcended their official roles. Social media continued to explode with reactions to the incident. Military veterans from around the world began sharing their own stories of struggle and support, using the hashtag to discuss the importance of recognition and brotherhood among those who have served. The simple moment between two soldiers had sparked a global conversation about veteran mental health and the bonds that connect warriors across national boundaries. A BBC News crew, initially at the castle to film a routine feature on royal ceremonies, quickly pivoted to cover the developing story. They interviewed spectators about what they had witnessed, capturing a range of reactions from confusion to deep emotional understanding. The footage would later become part of a documentary about military tradition and human compassion. The formation reached the end of their ceremonial route, and the guards began to disperse according to protocol. James knew that he would face immediate questioning about his breach of discipline, but he felt a strange sense of peace about his decision. Some things were more important than regulations, and the look of gratitude in the American's eyes had confirmed that his instinct was correct. Michael remained at the periphery of the dispersing crowd, still processing the emotional impact of the encounter. He felt changed by the experience, as if a weight he had carried for months had finally been acknowledged and shared. The guard's recognition had provided something that traditional therapy had struggled to deliver, the understanding that his pain was valid and his service was remembered. An older British gentleman approached Michael hesitantly, his own military bearing evident despite his advanced age. "Excuse me, son," he said gently. "I'm Colonel Retired Henry Ashworth. I couldn't help but notice what happened back there. Are you quite all right?" The genuine concern in the old soldier's voice nearly brought tears to Michael's eyes. Once again, military brotherhood was transcending artificial boundaries. The impact of the incident continued to spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Families who had come for a simple tourist experience found themselves discussing deeper questions about service, sacrifice, and the human cost of military duty. Children who had expected to see toy soldiers discovered that the men in the colorful uniforms were real people with real emotions and real connections to each other. Sergeant Major Williams approached James as the ceremony concluded, his expression serious but not entirely unsympathetic. "Lance Corporal Harrison," he said quietly, "we need to have a conversation about what just happened out there." James nodded, understanding that his actions would have consequences, but also knowing that some things were worth facing those consequences for. The crowd began to disperse, but many lingered to continue discussions about what they had witnessed. The simple moment of human connection between two soldiers had created something larger than itself, a reminder that beneath uniforms and ceremonies were human beings who had sacrificed much and deserved recognition for that sacrifice. As the immediate excitement began to settle, the true significance of what had occurred started to become clear. This wasn't just a breach of protocol or a moment of military indiscipline. It was a powerful reminder of the bonds that connect those who have served, the importance of recognition and support for veterans struggling with invisible wounds, and the courage required to choose compassion over regulation when the situation demands it. The morning sun climbed higher over Windsor Castle, warming the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of military tradition. But this day would be remembered not just for its ceremony and pageantry, but for a moment when two soldiers chose to see each other as human beings first and representatives of their respective nations second. The crowd had been shocked not by scandal or impropriety, but by the raw power of human connection in an age that often seemed to value procedure over people. 3 hours after the ceremony ended, Lance Corporal James Harrison sat across from Colonel Margaret Thornton in a sparse office within Windsor Castle's administrative wing. The silence stretched between them as the colonel reviewed the initial incident reports and social media coverage that had exploded across the internet. James maintained his military posture, hands folded, eyes forward, but inside he felt the weight of his career hanging in the balance. Colonel Thornton, a veteran of 3 deployments herself, had spent the morning fielding calls from military leadership, media outlets, and even members of Parliament who had seen the viral footage. The video of James breaking protocol had been viewed over 2 million times in just a few hours, with comments ranging from harsh criticism to overwhelming support. The situation was unprecedented in modern military ceremony history. "Lance Corporal Harrison," the colonel began, her voice measured but not unkind, "in 32 years of military service, I have never encountered a situation quite like this. You are aware, of course, that your actions violated fundamental protocols that have governed ceremonial duties for centuries." She paused, studying his face for signs of remorse or defiance, but finding neither, only quiet resolve. James straightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I am fully aware of the breach of protocol and am prepared to accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate." His voice remained steady, though his heart pounded with the knowledge that his military career, the only life he had known since joining at 18, might end because of a split-second decision to show human compassion. The colonel leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Before we discuss consequences, I want to understand your reasoning. Your service record is exemplary. You have never shown any indication of difficulty maintaining discipline or following orders. What happened out there, Harrison? What made you break a protocol you've followed flawlessly for 6 years?" For the first time since entering the office, James's composure wavered slightly. He thought of the American's eyes, the raw pain and desperation he had seen there, the immediate recognition of a fellow warrior drowning in his own trauma. "Ma'am, I saw a brother in distress. The gentleman at the barrier was clearly a military veteran experiencing what appeared to be significant combat stress. In that moment, military brotherhood superseded ceremonial protocol." Meanwhile, across London, Michael Thompson sat in a quiet cafe near his hotel, staring at his untouched coffee as he watched the news coverage of the incident on his tablet. The BBC was calling it the Windsor Protocol breach, and military analysts were debating whether the Guards' actions were admirable or inexcusable. Michael felt simultaneously grateful for the recognition he had received and guilty about the consequences the young British soldier was clearly facing. His phone had been ringing constantly since returning to his hotel. Dr. Martinez had called 6 times, his sister Lisa had left worried voicemails, and surprisingly, several unknown numbers had somehow gotten hold of his contact information. The viral nature of the incident meant that his private moment of struggle had become public property, dissected and analyzed by strangers around the world. Dr. Martinez finally reached him on her 7th attempt. "Michael, I've been trying to reach you for hours. I saw the news coverage. Are you all right?" Her voice carried the professional concern of a therapist mixed with genuine personal worry for her patient's well-being. Michael's voice was hoarse with emotion when he finally responded. "Dr. Martinez, something incredible happened today. For the first time since I came back from Afghanistan, someone saw me. Really saw me. That British soldier risked everything just to acknowledge my pain, and now he's probably going to lose his career because of it." The conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes, with Dr. Martinez helping Michael process the complex emotions surrounding the incident. The guilt about potentially causing harm to someone who had helped him mixed with profound gratitude for the moment of recognition and understanding. She encouraged him to focus on the positive impact the experience had on his healing journey while acknowledging his concern for the guard's welfare. Back at Windsor Castle, Colonel Thornton continued her interview with James. She had reviewed his military record in detail, his commendations for valor in Afghanistan, his perfect scores on all evaluations, his reputation as a natural leader among the younger guards. This was not a soldier prone to reckless behavior or lack of discipline. "The American gentleman in question," she said, reading from a preliminary report, "has been identified as Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, United States Marine Corps, veteran of 3 combat deployments. According to eyewitness accounts, he was visibly distressed during the ceremony. Several tourists mentioned that he appeared to be experiencing some form of panic attack." James nodded slowly. "That matches my observations, ma'am. His military bearing was unmistakable despite civilian clothing, and his distress was obvious to anyone with combat experience. He needed to know that his service and sacrifice were recognized by someone who understood." The colonel set down the report and studied James carefully. "The media attention has been extraordinary. We've received over 3,000 emails in the past 4 hours, with the vast majority supporting your actions. Veterans organizations from 12 countries have issued statements praising your compassion. Even former members of parliament have weighed in on your behalf." She paused, pulling up social media feeds on her computer. "However, military tradition and discipline cannot be subject to popular opinion. The protocols you violated exist for important reasons, not merely as arbitrary restrictions. Ceremonial duties represent the continuity and reliability of British military tradition. When one guard breaks protocol, it undermines the foundation of that tradition." James understood the complexity of his situation. "Ma'am, I accept full responsibility for my actions and their consequences. However, I believe that true military tradition includes caring for fellow warriors, regardless of nationality. The protocols are important, but they serve a higher purpose, representing the values and character of the British military. Sometimes those values require us to act with human compassion." The argument was compelling, and Colonel Thornton found herself in the unusual position of agreeing with a subordinate who had clearly violated regulations. The situation had no precedent in military history, requiring her to balance traditional discipline with the obviously positive impact of James's actions on public perception and veteran awareness. Her phone interrupted the conversation, a call from General Sir Nicholas Carter's office requesting an immediate briefing on the situation. The incident had reached the highest levels of military leadership, with implications extending far beyond a simple breach of ceremonial protocol. The general would make the final decision on James's fate, but her recommendation would carry significant weight. Meanwhile, Michael made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. He picked up his phone and called the British Embassy in London, asking to be connected with someone who could help him reach the military officials handling the guard's case. After being transferred multiple times, he found himself speaking with a diplomatic liaison who agreed to pass along his message. "Please tell them that Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, United States Marine Corps, wants to take full responsibility for what happened today," he said firmly. "That young man was responding to a fellow warrior in distress. If there are consequences, they should fall on me, not him. He was doing what any good soldier should do, taking care of his brothers." The diplomatic liaison was taken aback by the unexpected call, but promised to pass along Michael's message to the appropriate military authorities. The conversation represented another unprecedented element in an already extraordinary situation. An American veteran voluntarily accepting responsibility for a British soldier's breach of protocol. Within an hour, Colonel Thornton received a summary of Michael's statement along with a formal letter he had dictated to the embassy staff. The letter provided context for his emotional state during the ceremony, expressed profound gratitude for the guard's compassion, and formally requested that no disciplinary action be taken against Lance Corporal Harrison. The letter concluded, "In 3 combat deployments, I learned that the true measure of a soldier is not blind adherence to regulations, but the courage to do what is right when it matters most. Lance Corporal Harrison demonstrated the finest qualities of military service: courage, compassion, and brotherhood that transcends artificial boundaries. Any punishment for his actions would be a disservice to the values we all swore to uphold." Colonel Thornton found herself moved by the American veteran's words and the obvious sincerity behind them. The situation continued to evolve beyond simple military discipline into something approaching international diplomacy and humanitarian concern. She realized that her decision would impact not just James's career, but the broader relationship between military services and the public perception of how veterans are treated. The afternoon brought additional developments. The video footage had been analyzed by behavioral experts who confirmed that Michael had indeed been experiencing a severe anxiety episode consistent with combat-related PTSD. Medical professionals pointed out that James's moment of recognition might have prevented a more serious mental health crisis from developing. Veterans organizations on both sides of the Atlantic began organizing support campaigns for both men. The American Legion issued a statement praising an act of international military brotherhood that exemplifies the finest traditions of service. The Royal British Legion echoed similar sentiments, describing the incident as a powerful reminder of the bonds that unite all who have served. By evening, the story had grown beyond military circles into mainstream news coverage. Talk shows debated the balance between tradition and compassion. Social media campaigns used hashtags like Our Military Brotherhood and Protocol V's Compassion to discuss broader issues of veteran support and military culture. The simple moment of eye contact between 2 soldiers had sparked a global conversation about values and priorities. General Sir Nicholas Carter, after reviewing all available information and consulting with senior leadership, made his decision. He would not pursue formal disciplinary action against Lance Corporal Harrison, but would instead use the incident as an opportunity to review ceremonial protocols and veteran support procedures. The decision represented a rare victory of human compassion over bureaucratic inflexibility. The official statement, released the following morning, read, "While the British Army maintains the highest standards of discipline and protocol, we also recognize that our fundamental duty is to serve with honor, courage, and compassion." Lance Corporal Harrison's actions, while technically a breach of ceremonial protocol, exemplified the finest traditions of military service and international brotherhood. After thorough review, no disciplinary action will be taken. James learned of the decision during his morning briefing, and the relief was visible on his face despite his military training. His fellow guards, who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, expressed their satisfaction with the outcome. The incident had strengthened rather than weakened their unit cohesion. Michael, watching the news coverage from his hotel room, felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down his cheeks. The young British soldier who had risked everything to acknowledge his pain would not face consequences for his compassion. More importantly, the incident had sparked conversations that might help other veterans struggling with similar invisible wounds. The long-term impacts of the Windsor Protocol breach, as historians would later call it, extended far beyond the immediate participants. Military academies began teaching case studies about the incident, exploring the balance between regulation and human compassion. Veteran support organizations used the story to illustrate the importance of recognition and brotherhood in healing combat trauma. Dr. Martinez noted significant improvements in Michael's therapy sessions following his return to North Carolina. The recognition he had received from James had broken through months of emotional numbness, allowing him to begin processing his combat experiences more effectively. The incident had provided something that traditional therapy struggled to deliver: validation from someone who truly understood his experience. James continued his ceremonial duties at Windsor Castle, though he noticed that tourists often watched him with particular interest, recognizing him from the viral footage. He handled the attention with characteristic military bearing, but privately felt gratified that his moment of compassion had contributed to broader discussions about veteran welfare and military brotherhood. 6 months after the incident, Michael and James finally met in person when Michael returned to London specifically to thank the guard who had changed his life. Their meeting, arranged through official channels and attended by representatives from both militaries, was emotional and profound. Two warriors who had connected across artificial boundaries discovered a friendship that would last for years. The photograph from that meeting, two soldiers from different nations shaking hands in civilian clothes, both smiling genuinely for the first time in months, became another viral sensation. But this time, the focus was on healing, friendship, and the positive power of human connection, rather than protocol breaches and military discipline. The Windsor Protocol breach had taught everyone involved that sometimes the most important military traditions are not written in regulations or ceremonial manuals. They exist in the unspoken bonds between warriors, the commitment to care for one another, and the courage to choose compassion when the moment demands it. In breaking a centuries-old protocol, James Harrison had actually upheld the most fundamental military tradition of all, that those who serve never abandon their brothers in arms, regardless of uniform or nationality.